you for joining us today. Today I have the honor and the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Frank C. Worrell. He is the current president of the American Psychological Association. He is a distinguished professor in the Berkeley School of Education at the University of California, Berkeley, where he serves as faculty director of the School Psychology Program, the Academic Talent Development Program, and the California College Preparatory Academy. He is a certified school psychologist as well as a licensed psychologist. In addition to his position at UC Berkeley, Dr. Worrell is an affiliate professor in the social and personality area in the Department of Psychology. His areas of expertise include at-risk youth, cultural identities, scale development and validation, talent development, gifted education, teacher effectiveness, time perspective, and the translation of psychological research findings into school-based practice. Dr. Worrell recently came to Regent University and gave a talk that I sadly had to miss, but I heard great things about it, so I reached out to him and he's graciously agreed to be with us today. So, Dr. Worrell, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure. I was delighted to be invited.
I like to start off with just asking kind of your background and your general, what got you interested in psychology and school education and psychology in particular?
So I came to the United States to do my PhD, and I was principal of what would have been a continuation high school in the U.S., what it would have been labeled a continuation high school. Okay. And so I continued to be interested in how can we help students to maximize their potential, both academic, but also other than academic, and how can we help them to be their best selves across the board? I think that's really a key thing in developing productive and contributing citizens who are going to, help us as we move forward in the world.
Yeah. Okay. What is, out of all of your years of experience, what have you found any interesting factors, or maybe even single factors that would contribute to better educating students?
I think we know a lot. It's hard to translate into sometimes into practice. But we talk a lot about seeing the full person, not just the academics, and even parents, rewarding kids because they've gotten an A, but seeing the whole person, right? Accepting people for where they are, whether they get an A or a C, and so forth. But also, I think, and I study time perspective, I think is one of the things you mentioned, helping students to see that the future is full of possibility. I think that's a key concern. I don't think I would have been here today if there were not people who said, go do what you want to do. And we support you doing that, right? And I think that's really important. I think there are many kids for whom the future, it's not that you're telling them to do something specific, but that they can have the future they want to have.
Yeah, I think, that makes sense. That's really important. I lived in Japan for a while, and I know over there, even in for high school students, if they don't get accepted into the certain high school they were going for, which means that they would be able to go to the college that they want to go to, a lot of them end up depressed and committing suicide or withdrawing, and
right.
I think they feel like they have no future possibilities if that's the case.
And I think that's one of the things that America has really, I think, shown much of the rest of the world. I think very much the European system and the British system, I don't think they were intended that way, but sometimes they cut off possibilities to the future. And I think the American education system says you can continue. I mean, so you may not have done well in high school, but you can go to junior college or go do something post high school that actually will make you a contributing citizen and stuff. And those possibilities, I think, are great. America does now. It hasn't done it equally for all groups across its history, but I do think the general principle is present and a really important one for the rest of the world to learn from.
Yeah, one of my friends, his wife is Asian American, and she went to a community college, and now she's going to med school. And so that's really neat to see that.
Yeah.
And so how long, So you came here, you got your PhD, and what was your PhD in exactly?
Well, I was in the school psychology program, although it was called education. We studied sort of educational and school psychology. The PhD was, so it was educational school psychology, sort of a combined program.
Okay.
Where, got, sort of the research chops of, and stuff, but also got the clinical practice, the clinical training.
Okay. So you worked did you work in the high schools or?
So as a school psychologist, I never worked full time in schools because when I graduated, I was an international student, and I got a faculty position right away. So I did do some work in schools part time when I was an assistant professor, and it was across the board. I was at Penn State, so it was in rural Pennsylvania. I was working for a school district that didn't have a school psychologist. A standing school psychologist, and so they used the services of many of us who were contracted. And so it went from elementary all the way up to high.
Okay. Did you enjoy that?
Yes, I did. I enjoyed practice. In fact, my advisor, who wanted me to be a researcher, was afraid that she was going to lose me to practice. But, the thing about it is, and I have a number of friends who are serious researchers who are also researchers, who do practice a day a week. I chose to do a lot of service work, and so it was a matter of research and service or research and practice, and so I did research and service.
Okay. And what did the service work look like?
Well, service to the profession. So, so I've served on a number of committees of APA, and divisions of APA, Division 5, Division 16, which is school psychology. I've also served on committees of the American Educational Research Association, the National Association for Gifted Children, and certainly at the university, a part of the thing that we are judged on is also, evaluated on is also service. I've done a lot of service at the level, and even in some communities, I was at Penn State, I was on the board of directors of the AIDS Project in that area. Here in California, I served on the board of directors of the East Bay Center for the Performing Arts because I sing and conduct. So,
oh wow,
yeah,
wow, that's neat. So yeah, you've done a lot of different service in different organizations. I imagine that set you up really well for your candidacy for the APA presidency.
Yeah, I think so.
What is it that I personally, I'm not like a big institutional or organizational type of person. What is it that draws you to the service and being a part of these organizations?
The service orientation, I think, came long before I came to the United States. My parents were both born in little fishing villages. They were not from very poor families. We are talking about houses, little wooden houses, no electricity, gas lamps and those kinds of things. Yeah. And both of them ended up in the capital city and ended up, I think, going further than they would have gone if they had not moved to the capital. My mom eventually, in fact, became an elementary school teacher and retired as a principal. And,
cool.
And my father, who had only didn't even finish elementary school, became a police officer, but didn't get any promotions because he didn't have education. Oh. But one of the things that they did with a number of their friends who had moved to the capital is they formed an association to fundraise for kids from their villages to come to the capital to go to secondary school because there were only elementary schools in their villages.
Oh,
and
wow.
So I grew up in a household where every year they were doing these fundraisers. For this organization. My father's village, Toko, was the largest village, and so it was called the Toko Old Boys and Girls Association. But it really, all the villages in that area, my mother's village is Grand Riviere. I typed up minutes for their meetings, as all of the kids in the households, ended up serving, helping, because my aunt was secretary and she couldn't type. So, with my two older sisters and then myself. And so this idea of service and when my mom, became a teacher and then a principal, she was a principal of, again, a school that was outside the capital. And they didn't have a lot of money. So they'd be having these fundraisers to buy a photocopy and things that we take for granted in schools here. And so I would be, be helping there with them with the Mayfair and the other fundraisers that they were doing. One that I recall specifically, because I have a loud voice, is they were having a fashion show, but they didn't have a microphone. So I was their microphone. Essentially, I just told what the color was and what the frills were and stuff.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
But, so this idea of giving back. And again, my mom was very involved in the church. She was church secretary, treasurer of the Mothers Union. I mean, so the idea of service is something that was really an intimate part of my household growing up.
Yeah, it makes complete. Yeah, you grew up like embedded in your family and the culture, and then and it hit me that your mom worked in education, and so and then you ended up that's neat. Yeah, I bet your parents can I ask, are your parents still are they still around?
No, they've both passed away, but I can say that without them I would not be sitting here today. They were both incredibly proud. My father got diagnosed with cancer the year I started my doctorate degree and was given 2 years, but he lasted 10, and so he and my mother were both at my graduation with my doctorate program, and as luck would have it that year, you can plan these things. The graduation ceremony was on my mother's birthday.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
That is so neat.
Yeah.
Man, that's cool. And so how long did you, I should know this, but how long have you been the president of the APA now?
Just this year. So it's a 1 year. So you serve as president for 1 year. It's a 3-year term. You serve, you get elected. And the first year you're president-elect. So that was last year I was president-elect. This year I'm president. Next year I'll be past president. And you have different sets of duties each of those years. But the year you're president is the year that you're chair of the board and sort of the face of APA for the public. But yes.
Okay. And how has your first year been?
It's been intense. I think until you sit in this chair, in some sense, you have no idea how much is coming at you. APA is a huge organization. We currently have over 140,000 members. We publish 89 journals. We have a staff of over 500 individuals who work for APA. And in some sense, you're chairing the board that's dealing with all of that. Now, there's a CEO, of course, who runs the organization day to day and with a very competent staff. But as chair of the board, a lot of things come to you. You're president. And also then you have to respond to things that are going on in society that, you may not plan for. The mass shootings, for instance, that have been happening this year, hate crimes that have gone up, increased tremendously, anti-Semitism, anti-Asian hate. So all of that comes, comes at you.
Yeah. And what was the decision like to decide to run for presidency?
It was one of those interesting things. It was not something on that I had planned for at all. Indeed, when I first ran for division office, I was serving the division. I was chairing a committee for Division 16, school psychology, and then I was asked to run for the presidency, and I was like, well, I'm not sure. And the person who was running, I was running against a friend and colleague who had run the year before and hadn't won, and I was like, I don't want to run against him and so forth. But the division said we like to run 2 people, and he called me and he said, don't be ridiculous, run for it. And the person was trying to convince me, said, oh, you never win the first time anyway. And so I ran for presidency of the division. And so I ended up winning, and stuff, even though I actually voted for my colleague. And then I was president, president-elect, president, past president. And again, one of those strange things happened. I think we had a president who got ill or died, and so she couldn't serve her term. And so the president-elect took over, and I ended up serving for past president for 2 years instead of 1 because there was this gap. And the year I was past president, one of the things you do is you run the elections. And so I was running the elections for council. And Cecil Reynolds, who is an extremely well-known school psychologist, and in fact well-known psychologist, the Behavior Assessment System for Children, the BASC, which is used, I think, all over the world. He's one of the co-authors of the BASC, among other tests. We were running him as as one of our council reps. And you have to run two people. And I'm trying to get people to run, and they ask me, who am I running against? Cecil. No, I don't want to do it. So the deadline was upon us, and I'm rotating off the board. So I said to the board, the Division 16 board, I'll be the sacrificial lamb. I'll run against him. He'll win, and we can move on. And so I ran against him, and this time I voted for myself, and I won by one vote. And so I ended up being on council. It was really funny because I actually had to do a red eye because I had made arrangements to give a talk in San Francisco the night before council started because I was not planning. I didn't anticipate that I would win. And so being on council, then you get to see the association from a different level, right? Yeah. Council is the governing body of APA. It sets policy. And during that time, the division then had a strategic plan and said school psychology is, we're small and lots of people don't understand what we do. We should try to be more visible within APA. So that became, and so somebody should try to run for the board.
Oh, no.
So when I was at my last year at council, I decided, I was up. So, we had made it as a division. And so I ran for the board and I ended up winning. So then I got to serve a term on the board. And I served from 2016, 17, and 18. And so I had to make the decision, was I going to try to run for president again? The ultimate visibility, of course, for psychology would be the presidency of APA. And while we had a school psychology president before, he is actually very associated, Don Bursoff. His PhD was in school psychology, but in the 60s, but he had done a lot of legal work afterwards and taught legal stuff, and most people know him as sort of more forensic legal psychologist rather than as a school psychologist. And so I made the decision in 2019. I took a year off. Okay, I was going to run. Went announced my candidacy in February of 2022 at the APA council meeting, and then COVID hit shortly thereafter. And, I ended up winning. And I think in part, this may sound cynical, but I think that in part, one of the things that happened in the year I was running for president was George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis. And I was the only minority candidate on the ballot. And I think in some sense, because minority issues is sort of a galvanizing of a civil rights movement, a recognition of the importance of having role models and people in places of authority who reflect the breadth of America, helped contribute to the election.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you know the percentage of, let's say, Black or African American psychologists
within APA or? Yeah, I don't know the exact percentage. I do know it's small. We've done one of the things we did recently, as you may know, is we passed an apology to people of color for psychology's role in perpetuating racism, and also committed APA and psychology to moving to end systemic racism. As part of that work, this year we did an audit. What we do know is that something like, while only 60% of the population is white, something like 78% of the psychology workforce is white. I think 76% of council is white, so forth. So I don't have the exact numbers for the different groups, but we do know that they are below their representation in the population. And a lot of people see that as a sign of racism in and of itself, and I think it's part of a broader trend in society. I mean, the percentage of psychologists who are white used to be in the 90%. So we are trending in the right direction. And stuff. And before I did my PhD, I was a secondary school teacher. I taught English and history. And I like to think things from a historical perspective, right? So that we are moving in the right direction, and these are things that take generations to change. We want them to change now in a year or two, but it's not possible. Because we are talking about having more psychologists, more people with PhDs in psychology. That means having more people from ethnic groups go to college in the first place, not just undergraduate, but then go on to grad school. That means graduations from high school. So we have the issue is not just that they're out there and they're not here. We need to actually increase the numbers of individuals who have these credentials if we want to see them in the various roles where these credentials matter.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then there's like, I think 80% of psychologists are probably female nowadays.
That's the other thing, yes.
Yeah, and that's not like...
That's the other thing. So, and it's happening in psychology, but not just in psychology. I mean, it hasn't hit... I think STEM is sort of the last holdout area because, and even there, the biological sciences, for instance, medical doctors, the biology and medicine, I've gotten a majority. They're not quite at the level of psychology yet, but female. And what we know is that this is an issue that, again, goes all the way down to the K-12 system, right? Female students are graduating from high school at greater rates than males. They're going on to college at greater rates than males. And this is happening even in countries that we may call chauvinistic countries that are very male-dominated. So this is a thing that we are seeing worldwide.
Interesting.
And it's of course, we want balance, and it's great because females were underrepresented for so long, and still, for instance, don't get paid the same amount for the same work, and that. So we need to change those things. But I do think we need to be careful that we do not end up going from one imbalance to another imbalance. Right?
That sounds. You don't want to just go the opposite side of the pendulum, huh?
Right. Yeah. So.
I've also heard. I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Redding. I can't think of his first name, but he's been doing work on like socio-political values as a diversity factor. Right. So, like in psychology, especially social psychology, I think it's like 14-1 liberal or Democrat, and then 1 conservative.
Right.
And that's just another example of.
Right. And, it's interesting. I do think psychology is more left-leaning. I'm at a left-leaning institution. My advisor, my doctoral advisor has passed away now. My understanding is she was a Republican. I was a foreign student. I was an international student when I was here, right? So I wasn't thinking Democrat, Republican. I wasn't voting. It was not something that I could do here.
Yeah.
I do think that it is important to recognize multiple types of diversity. And I do know that certainly conservatives, some conservatives within APA have felt, in some sense, isolated because of the proportionality. One of the things I tried to do this year at Council, both in February when we were virtual and in August when we were in person, is to state at the outset that, in fact, all views were welcome. And I'm hopeful. I think, I know a number of conservative members said to me, even though the votes that we took sometimes they didn't vote yes, but they felt that their voices were heard.
Oh, okay.
And I think that that's a really important thing.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think that for our society to be able to serve all of its members, it needs to hear all of those voices, and you end up with compromised positions. That's which our politicians don't do very well these days. But I do think that the gridlock that we are seeing actually hurts all of us, whether we are conservative, liberal, or somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we need to find ways to recognize everybody's voice and get everybody served. I think, from me, the idea of where you draw the line is how do we help the people that we're supposed to serve. This is America. I chose this as a country, as a home country, and now I'm an American citizen, right? But we use phrases like, leader of the free world. We use phrases like, the richest country on earth and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Right. But California, where I am, has a huge homeless problem. New York does as well. So, we do not have many people who don't have health care. On NPR this morning, I heard that there are hospital systems that are now building low-income housing to help people who are frequent people coming to the emergency room because it's going to cost them less money
Oh,
to
wow.
house them, because then get their health better than to keep serving them through the emergency room. And
Yeah.
so I think there are things that we are working towards as a society that I think should not be conservative or, or
Yeah.
liberal, right?
Yeah.
Really should be, how do we help our all of our population
Mm.
achieve what America has, the status America has achieved in the world.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I see why you were voted president. Out of all of the, so like, you came to Regent University and you gave a talk here. I'm sure you're traveling all around the States giving talks and speeches and stuff. Out of all of the stuff that you're doing, like, what is it maybe that you're aiming toward, or what is it that you enjoy doing the most, or what are you passionate about right now?
I am sort of passionate about psychology, and this is something that we've been working on for a while, about psychology sort of being recognized for its contributions. I think one of the things that happened that COVID-19 did is it put on the map psychology, because mental health issues became such a problem. And not just for adults, but for children, for adolescents, for the nation, right? And in fact, for the world. Psychologists have waiting lists and so forth. But that focus, one of the, I think, problematic issues is that we only see psychology as dealing with mental health. So there's a lot of psychology, right? Human factors, right? Educational psychology helps students to learn. Social psychology, I mean, the political divide, the misinformation, developmental psychology. How do we get kids to, in fact, get that sense of a hopeful future? There are lots of contributions that psychology makes across the board, right? Quantitative psychology. I develop attitudinal measures. So those things are often invisible to the general public. But they're extremely important for society, right? The workplace right now. I mean, in industrial organizational psychology and consulting psychology. So while it's really great that there's a recognition that we have tremendous contributions to make in the sphere of mental health, we have tremendous contributions to make in the sphere of behavior across the board. And I think that has been sort of the passion,
Yeah, I like that. When I came into this program, I'm getting my PsyD. We had a class on industrial organization, and I was like, what is? I didn't understand psychologists even could do that as a
right.
So
and I think that's exactly it, right? So APA has 54 divisions, right? And a lot of people know about clinical psych and counseling psych and so forth. But fewer people know about the media division and psychology, and then there's military psychology, and and there are a host of other areas that are not necessarily clinically focused.
Greater awareness of that would be great. As the president of the APA and being kind of the representative of like school psychology or educational psychology, do you have the ability to maybe advancing through your career, you saw gaps or holes that you were like, if I was the president, I would focus on this area. Do you have that ability now?
Not as much as one might think. I do believe that one of the things that one learns when one comes into a role like this, if one is not aware of it before, and I think the same thing happens with the President of the United States, is that you have a limited ability to make huge sweeping changes, right? I think the biggest contribution I've made to school psychology has been being able to say, I'm the president of AP and I'm a school psychologist. In fact, I said this at the opening of the convention to the delight of Division 16. I'm a school psychologist and I'm the president of the American Psychological Association. And I think that representation is really important because it also says to other school psychologists, younger school psychologists, to my students, and stuff, that you can be someday. And interestingly enough, this didn't only apply to school psychologists. At convention, a lot of people came up to me, people who were from Trinidad, who are psychologists here in the United States. You know, there are not a lot of us, but there are some of us, and they were at convention and they wanted to say hello to me. International students came up to me and said, "Is it true that you were an international student and now you're president of APA?" Open, you know. So again, this idea of being a role model. In fact, Dr. Bryant, who is the president-elect, will be president as of January 1st, and I suggest you might reach out to her to interview her. I'm sure she'd be willing to do this. Has a one of her things is called Representation Matters, one of her initiatives, right? Where she's going to showcase psychologists from historically excluded groups. I think what the work that I've been doing, I mean, you have a year. I was really committed to getting the Racial Diversity Equity Action Plan passed because, you know, we had done the apology in 2021. And so this year, 2022, you have to keep the momentum. And so that's what I did. So I did not come in with major initiatives in the way that many presidents do. I actually said, you know, there are a number of things we need to do. We have a strategic plan. We are starting to rethink updating that strategic plan, which was passed in 2019. You know, got the Racial Equity Action Plan passed. And let's taking a look at us as an organization and saying, what are the things we need to do as we move forward in this new world where we are a lot more visible than we used to be before. Right? Because that comes with some responsibilities, but, you know, you need resources and so forth. So helping to think those things through. And it goes back to just like you talked. Sorry, Daniel. One other thing I was going to say. One of the things I have been able to do, and I've not quite done it yet, but I realized that I have been, you know, one of the things you do get to do as president is you get to give presidential citations. And I had actually, I've done citations for a number of individuals, most of whom are not school psychologists because, you know, they come from various sources. People have made tremendous contributions. But I've been very intentional, and in fact, before the year ends, I will be giving citations to one or two school psychologists for the work that they're doing to showcase that work. So that's another thing.
Good. But, I was just going to say it goes back to the earlier talk about kind of having a hope for the future or vision for the future. And for like either international students or people in educational psychology, and they can see you and they're like, oh, I can reach that one day, perhaps.
Yes.
That's really neat.
My mom was very instrumental in this idea of forward looking. My sister and I laugh all the time because my brother, sister, and I, because she used to she had all these sayings that she had, you know, that were used. And, you know, aim for the stars, because if you miss, you can land in the treetops. If you only aim for the treetops and you miss, you land in the mud, and that kind of thing. And one day, when I was taking her and a friend somewhere, because she stopped driving, I think the first day she got her driving license when she was in her 40s, and her driver's license. And she went out, and somebody went through a stop sign and hit her car, right? She just did not drive after that, you know, and stuff. So I was taking her and a friend somewhere, and the friend, I think I was maybe 18, 19 or something like that. And a friend said, you know, what do you want Frank to be when he grows up? And I'm driving, right? I'm rolling my eyes thinking, why would you even ask that? You know? And my mother said something that was absolutely incredible that I have never forgotten. She said, you know, I really don't care what he does. I just want him to do it well. So, for example, if we are walking on a street in the capital and you say to me, oh my God, look how clean the street is. This is the cleanest street in the capital. I can say to you with pride, my son cleans this street. And I thought at the time, if I told you I'm becoming a street sweeper, let's see how that's going to go. But as I got older and, you know, and started to study what I study, what that message meant, you know, was taken on greater significance, right?
My mom's, I grew up in a Christian family, and my mom liked Proverbs a lot. Or maybe it wasn't from Proverbs, but there's a verse about whatever you do, do it unto the Lord and not unto men. And she always talked to me about like giving it my best, and regardless of what other people, regardless of praise from men. But that's kind of.
I've always said my mom there was the hierarchy. I mean, a psychologist is not in her plan, actually. Number one was priest. Number two was doctor, medical stuff. And I didn't do either of those. But as she said, do what you want, So.
Yeah. And you're doing it very well, it looks like. So, yeah, that's great. Did you have, so like I'm more interested in the therapeutic or the clinical aspect. And so I look up to like Carl Rogers or, Carl Jung, people like that. Did you have people in the educational psychology field that you looked up to or read or?
Right. The theorist who I think was most instrumental in for me was Erik Erikson.
Oh yeah.
Psychosocial theory, and I recognize, like many theories of its generation, it was sexist and theory, the theory of man, right? But the idea that psychology and the social environment interact, I think it's interesting because Erikson's theory, he didn't have a lot of empirical study. It was really theoretical.
Yeah.
But I think we have seen much of what he has said come to pass. A lot of the work on risk and resilience, right? On individuals from poverty who then end up being successful, right? If they find somebody or something in the environment that actually supports them. Right? Yeah. I study things like motivation or time attitudes or whatever. They're psychosocial theories, right? When I, from somebody from a poor family who in fact didn't necessarily plan to go to college, right? But I have an environment that says to me, well, you can do whatever you want to do, and I do well in school, and these opportunities present themselves, and I think that's I think so key as we move through our lives, right? That was a stage theory, and I know in many cases stage theories are going out of vogue, but he pointed us to so many important things. The study of identity, not just ego identity, but cultural identities, actually, which I study as well, come out of his work. He recognized that African Americans and Native Americans would have a harder time achieving having an achieved identity in the context of racism in the United States. Right? That's in his early writings. And so his the importance of relationships as you go into young adulthood, right? So moving from friendships and so forth to romantic relationships as you move forward. And I like the idea, his last stage talks about, generativity. When you look back on your life, you look back with a sense of integrity or despair. And of course, we want everybody to look back with a sense of integrity, right? It doesn't matter whether they were a bus driver or a medical doctor, right? It doesn't matter. Did they make a contribution? Did they do a good job in their sphere? Are they happy with the contributions that they have made, given where they were and what they were doing? So I think that theory for me has really been at the heart of my work, much of the work that I do, and stuff. And I think it's a really, really important perspective that psychology have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I've never read actual Erik Erikson's actual works. I've read textbook,
summary.
Yeah. I would like to read his work though.
Yeah, he has a 1950 book and a 1968 book, and I think the chapters. I think when you look at the chapters on identity, on African Americans, on Native Americans and stuff. In some sense, it's sort of profound, right? Because many of the issues, around stereotype threat, which is a leading social psychological theory, is really an identity theory. That's what it is, and it's a psychosocial identity theory, right? About how the messages that society gives to a particular group then results in that group having, the stereotypes that group, those stereotypes then affecting the performance of individuals in a situation where that stereotype is invoked. And so I think it's a theory that has had tremendous explanatory power, which I think is what theories need to do.
Yeah. Do you know if anyone's... I've never heard that Erikson talked about that, like African American and the society and Do you know if anyone's credited him for that?
Well, I do in my work. I mean, the thing is, articles are getting shorter and shorter, so you can do less and less.
Yeah.
But you can make reservations. I have a chapter in a book in 2015 chapter where cultures, race, ethnicity, and I talk about in the early part of the chapter I talk about that. I can certainly send it to you if you'd be interested.
Yeah, I would love. Yeah, thank you. Okay, last question. You talked about one of the main things that you would like to see, and that America does pretty well, is that even if you've gone, to community college, or you don't have to go to these Ivy League schools in order to have a good career and get into a good, like a med program, for instance. But you like the vision and people and understanding that society and the culture impacts the way that you move through the world. As far as the educational and the school systems go, what's the next step?
Right.
Yeah.
It's a hard prescription. I actually think it's a combination of, rigor with support.
Uh-huh.
One of the things that I have been struck by, and I think we see it, is that students in lower resource schools, students in school districts where there's a lower tax base and so forth,
uh-huh.
do not get as rigorous an education as students in other places.
Yeah.
And you always know that it I shouldn't say you always know, but certainly one example of that is when you see it manifesting itself in television stories. I was a big fan of crime stories, perhaps because my father was a policeman. And, there's a Law and Order Criminal Intent, I think it was, an episode where there was this young man who, he was in college and stuff, and African-American, and many of the things that were standard readings
uh-huh.
that other students at that university had done, he had not heard of the books, right?
Yeah.
When I came to Berkeley, I was interviewed by an education reporter, and shortly after I got here in the first couple of years, and she talked about going to having dinner at a friend's house, and the friend's son had taken the SAT, and he came home and said to his mom, and the mom shared this with her, I'm one of the top students in my school, and I went into this exam, and there were just so many things I had just never heard of.
Man.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, and I think there's often an assumption that the kids from low-income and minoritized backgrounds cannot deal with the rigor, right? And so we are we're helping them. But I think they need the rigor. They're going to be competing nationally, and I think they can deal with the rigor. I think that's what you see when you see, in fact, those of us who come from outside. And certainly, and they deal with the rigor in the wealthy districts, right? So, students in those districts. So I do think that ultimately we need to try to equalize the quality of education, I think, because one of the most profound things that's holding America back is the achievement gap. And people talk about, and people say you shouldn't call it an achievement gap, you should call it an opportunity gap because they don't have the same opportunities. And I can agree with saying there's an opportunity gap, but whether you say which causes which, there's an opportunity gap which results in an achievement gap, which then results in more opportunity gaps. It's a cyclical relationship. It's not one or the other. They both exist, and they are. And so that's, I think, the most profound thing that we have to change in our society to get to where we need to be.
And equalizing the education, that's naturally bringing them up, not the other way around as well,
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Raising the floor. And one of the things I've said, the reason that the achievement gap is a problem is less because of the gap itself, but what it represents. The students at the lower end of the gap are not performing in the competent range, right? And, they're not, if you look at using the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP data, they talk about, below basic, etc. There's proficient and advanced. And proficient, which is, is where you're being, you can do the work representative for your grade level.
Yeah.
Every group, I mean, the 80% of students, African Americans, Hispanics, and so forth, are not a proficient. But we have huge numbers, like 40-50% of whites and Asians who are not proficient either. So while the gap is most extreme in the historically marginalized groups, there's a problem across the board. Our education system has a problem across the board when you look at it. And if you saw the recent data, post-COVID-19, or, well, not post, but what I mean. The individuals who were affected the most, who lost the most during the 2 years of the shutdown, are the individuals with the lower scores. So, and stuff. It's, the opposite of a Matthew effect, right? The poor getting poorer, right? And stuff. And so that's, I think, our most profound challenge.
And I know that, there's been, what's it called? Affirmative action is kind of controversial. And I've heard some people say, like, well, you're letting them, the people who are not achieving at the same level as their peers, you're letting them into schools, but then they're not at that proficiency level. And so it's harder for them. They take out loans and then they end up not passing or something like that. I don't know. I've heard that kind of argument.
Affirmative action is controversial. I have, I have friends who are for it and friends who are against it. I would say this, that I think in many cases when affirmative action is practiced, it's not that it's being given to people who couldn't do the work, right? What happens is we have more people who can get in than we have slots, right? Right. And because of the achievement gaps, because of distributions, right? Right. So certainly there are some groups, there are more of them at the upper end than at the lower end. And so therefore they get in greater numbers. What affirmative action did is when it allowed people who in fact could do the work to get in to these places, even though, so they're more than past the floor you need to getting in. So that's in fact what it did, I think, to a lot of extent. And I think we've seen the benefit for it. In fact, there's some literature that actually says that the greatest beneficiaries of affirmative action were white females.
Oh, really?
Right. Yeah. So that, because again, because all of these things intertwine, right, and so forth. I do think that there is a psychological concern about affirmative action that needs to be addressed, but I think that can be addressed with supports. And we don't think about it a lot, and it's sometimes used as saying we shouldn't do it. But if, in fact, let's say I'm a professor here at Berkeley, I was told once by a staff member, I had been here for 10 years, and she said, you weren't the most qualified person when we hired you. In other words, I didn't get here because I was the most qualified candidate. I was given the job here at Berkeley because I was Black.
Wow.
And stuff. And I said, I didn't ask for that, and if that's what Berkeley did, that's on them. I said, I'm not going to apologize for exceeding expectations. Yeah. So, because at the end of the day, you can't tell me that I should not be here now.
Yeah.
Whether, in fact, you may have thought that then, you certainly cannot say that now.
That's a good response.
So we need to provide, but I think we need to provide supports because there are some people who, if they think that they got the job, not because they were qualified, but because of their ethnicity or race or whatever, are sometimes undermined, right? Their confidence, their self-esteem, their self-efficacy in the job is undermined. And so, in fact, if we are practicing affirmative action, we need to recognize that that's a possibility and have, in some sense, I said, rigor with support. And stuff, right? So we need to provide the appropriate supports as well if we're going to be practicing affirmative action. In California, we are not allowed. In fact, it's against state policy to use affirmative action.
Oh, really?
It's not. Yeah. So if it was practiced in my case, it was done illegally. But
and how do you? What is the roadblock to equalizing education or opportunity? Is it finances or?
I think it's a combination of things. I think, again, it's one of those things that we need to keep working at. it's certainly resources. I think, schools have fewer resources, but what that translates into sometimes is less effective teachers, and stuff. I think belief systems that, belief systems that not just educators hold, but children and their families, right? Think about what happens when kids from families with resources say they want to go into a field, sometimes like acting or something that is really difficult to make it in.
Yeah.
Many parents say that their kids don't do that, not because they don't love their kids, but they don't think their kids will succeed or be able to make a living, right? Because it's sort of a relief about the capacity of the kid to break through to get to the level where one can be successful as a musician or right. And so I think those belief systems play a role. Of course, the irony is, right, there are many black kids, black boys in particular, who think that it's easier to get to the NBA and the NFL is to become a medical doctor. And of course, it's just the opposite, right? All of the major sports, track and field, basketball, baseball, hockey, and football, I think they take in about 300 people a year. It's an incredibly exclusive club to get there, right? Whereas think of the number of doctors that we get every year, and the number of psychologists, and the thousands, right? But they're seeing these role models, and they're seeing them on the television every year. They're visible, right? Those of us in other fields are not visible. Schools need to make them visible to the youth, because it's not just the teachers who sometimes don't believe, the youth sometimes don't believe that they can get there. And stuff. So there are lots of things that we need to change, and I think, I do work. I have some colleagues who I do work with in New Zealand, and I've watched them, and they have similar gaps, right? And stuff. And so it's interesting to learn from others. This is not a uniquely American issue. We often, I think, one of the things we do not do as much in this country is to look at other countries and stuff. Not to say that we need to do things exactly the way they do it, but to learn from the way they are trying to do it. Right.
Yeah, that's really sad, because even so you're the president of the APA and you have a big place now, but society idolizes the football players and the money and the cars and all that. So it's hard. Even you're gonna definitely be a role model and stand out to quite a few people, but it's not on the same mass societal scale as
Right. Yes, I don't have the cachet. But I was doing music in Trinidad, and I remember when I was growing up, I think it was the 1976 Olympics, a Trinidadian won the 100-meter sprint, right? And of course, it was a national holiday. There were, the planes on the national fleet. The airline was named for him. I think then, I think it was maybe the next year, 77, or somewhere around that time, then somebody won Miss Universe, right? The Trinidadian won Miss Universe, and it was the same thing. Well, a Trinidadian, won an international music competition and stuff, and it's the same. And in fact, if you think about Miss Universe versus the music competition, the music competition, there's a lot more work. But there was nothing. There was absolutely nothing. It was, it's a very, very different level, right? And stuff. And so that, I think, is something that we need to celebrate, right? All of the, but we venerate people because, the actors and athletes get the amount of money that they get, right? So it's not just visibility, right? But the coin of the realm, right? They get a lot of it, much more than other people do.
Well, Dr. Worrell, I want to be respectful of your time. I really, again, appreciate talking to you. This has been a lot of fun and very enlightening. Thank you for joining me, and best of luck with everything.
Thank you very much again. Thank you for the invitation, and best wishes with your studies.
Thank you, sir.